Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kelly O'Donnell in Washington, where President Trump finds himself increasingly at odds with multiple Republican senators, including the Senate's Republican leader, publicly fighting over the president's agenda ahead of the midterms and putting his attorney general pick's confirmation in peril. The Senate Judiciary Committee was forced to delay a vote today to advance Todd Blanche's nomination to be Attorney General after Republican Senators Thom Tillis and John Cornyn, who are both leaving office when their terms expire, they're holding up the nomination over concerns about a deal Blanche cut to settle the president's lawsuit against the IRS. That deal gave the president and his family businesses immunity from tax audits and created a so-called anti-weaponization fund that could compensate Trump allies. Cornyn and Tillis want the DOJ to commit in writing to change that settlement and not move forward with the fund. The president today lashing out at the two senators on social media, taking credit for ending their political careers and threatening to pull Blanche's nomination until after those senators leave office in January. Now, it's worth noting neither Tillis nor Cornyn have explicitly said they would vote against Blanche, but both have made clear they are holding out until their demands are met.
It causes me concern if they don't want to put it in writing that this is not something that is going to be enforceable in the long term, because, as you know, people can change their mind later on, whether it's to reconstitute the weaponization fund or that what they claim the limits are of the release, that now they take a different position in a court. If they don't come to terms with the resolution that Senator Tillis and I have requested, then I think he's not going to be confirmed
at this point
anytime soon.
Senator Tillis, are you just as dug in as John Cornyn is on this nomination?
John, of course not dug in. I mean, what we are consistent.
What if they just waited you out? What if they just wait until you leave office?
Hey, 158 days, they can try it again, roll the dice on what the Senate confirmation process looks like next year. It's all on him. It's certainly within his authority to do that.
Meanwhile, the president's relationship with Senate Majority Leader John Thune is increasingly on the rocks amid an intensifying standoff over the president's election overhaul bill.
Look, we have to be able to get proof of citizenship when you vote. Otherwise, we don't have elections. We have to be able to get voter ID. So John is a leader, and hopefully he can get the votes.
Well, I would like them to get it passed. What I'd really like is for them to kill the filibuster, terminate the filibuster.
We've had the vote on the Full Save America Act twice. That didn't even get 50, let alone 60.
Everybody call John Thune at the Senate. He's the leader of the Republican Party, and tell him to get this stuff approved.
Getting rid of the filibuster non-starter, you don't have the votes?
Well, we don't, and I've actually I've had this conversation with the president many times. The votes aren't there to do it. I know he thinks he can persuade people, but there are a lot of folks who are this is a hard position for a lot of Senate Republicans.
And do you think Senate Majority Leader John Thune, after the comments you heard regarding Save America and some other stuff, do you think he's still the man for the job?
Well, we're going to find out, and I'll let you know.
All right. Well, that's nice of him, I guess. I don't know what you say on that. That's a decision made by my colleagues.
The rifts between President Trump and Senate Republicans over both of these presidential priorities come fewer than 100 days to the midterms, as the Republican Party hopes to overcome significant political headwinds on the Iran war, the economy, in order to keep their majorities in Congress. So to talk about all of this, joining me now from the White House is NBC's Monica Alba. With me here on set, Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Tsirkin and senior justice reporter Ryan Reilly. So, Monica, let's start with you. We saw how the threat from the president to simply hold off until Cornyn and Tillis are out of office. There were some concerns about that because that is a gamble. Who knows what the Senate will look like in January? So there's a risk there of not only them being gone, but others being concerned about voting for Blanche because the circumstances wouldn't change. What are you hearing there?
That's exactly right, Kelly. That is certainly something that could be a concern here, but it's sort of the way we read it and see this is President Trump kind of punting this problem for now because there isn't an easy solution to it, at least not in the immediate. And he is sort of arguing that he's willing to take that risk. And the fact that right now Todd Blanche is the acting attorney general means that he can continue in that position for a certain period of time. So what the White House is saying is they basically can keep it that way until December potentially. But then, of course, as you pointed out, the outcome of the midterm elections could really change the likelihood of his confirmation one way or the other. And then at that point, there is a question about what the president would need to do in terms of nominating somebody new to the position to become the permanent attorney general. But this is a president, as you know, Kelly, that really enjoys having some of his top cabinet officials in this acting capacity. And there are some that he has kept kind of repeating in that way. And it's possible he could try to do that here with acting attorney general Blanche. But again, he'll confront the political reality and the reality of what he needs to do in terms of the permanent position a few months down the line.
And we're also tracking those tensions with the majority leader, John Thune. And that's over the Save America Act. We've heard the president calling for this for a very long time, wanting that done. And he's also been vague on whether he thinks Thune is the best person to lead the Republican conference. And that seems reflective of his frustration over all of this. What do you think the future of that relationship looks like?
Well, one potential insight into this is that White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles was spotted meeting with Senator Thune just yesterday. It's unclear what exactly they talked about, but it's hard to imagine that there wasn't some kind of discussion about some of the president's recent comments. And even the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, remember that she said that the president was losing patience with Senator Thune, and Thune shot back and said, OK, well, then she should try to kind of come up with the votes here that simply do not exist for something like the Save America Act. So they had been trading those barbs back and forth. And so perhaps yesterday was a meeting to talk about some of that in person and see where there could be some room to work on some things that they do agree on. But Senator Thune has been crystal clear there that there just doesn't seem to be a support for that or for the filibuster issue that the president's been fixated on as well. Kelly.
Sometimes the vote count is really just about the math, and he knows the math. One of the things that is striking about some of these issues that are really causing tensions, they're very much personal priorities for the president, things that he deeply wants, more than broader issues that reflect sort of the interests of the larger party. When you're looking at the anti-weaponization fund, the Save America Act, the filibuster, how is that sort of casting a sort of Trump-like shadow over the agenda ahead of the midterms?
And these are years-long fixations in some cases. These are things that the president has really been obsessed with. And even if maybe some aides around him are trying to get him to focus on other topics, not necessarily abandon those completely, the president often returns to them. And so certainly when you're having a moment where the war against Iran is affecting the economy in the way that it is, there are certainly conversations inside the White House about trying to put that front and center and try to make that an issue that the White House is being out front on when it comes to affordability. But then the president comes out and dismisses that himself, saying that he doesn't really want to be talking about that. So then he often does revert to these other real passion projects that he is the one spending a ton of time on, even if they may not go anywhere. Kelly.
Monica, thank you for all those insights. Let me turn now to Julie and Ryan here in the studio with us. And Julie, when we're looking at where we are with the Blanche nomination, very clear these two senators who have a vote on the committee, that's crucial. They don't seem to be budging. And there are others in the party who may not be taking the hits publicly, but they share some of the same concerns. Is that your sense?
This was my sense in talking to all these different lawmakers and sources today, that maybe this is a strategy on the part of Cornyn and Tillis, two lawmakers, two senators who aren't running again, right? The president made sure of that. Maybe this is their opportunity to really hold the line in the sand and kind of give cover to the other Republican lawmakers, because I have talked to a number of Republicans, including Senator John Curtis, for example, who met with Blanche over other concerns he had yesterday. Todd Young told me that it's a moot point to ask him what he thinks about Blanche, because at this point he's not out of the committee. But all of this at this point, Kelly, is still about Cornyn and Tillis. And we just got word that at least Cornyn had a pretty interesting and good meeting with Blanche this afternoon. We're out to Tillis to see if he met with him, but I want you to take a listen to what Cornyn had to tell us about the president's threats and what he wants out of this. Watch this.
I don't know if it's just a negotiating technique on his part, but it doesn't really solve any problems because there's no guarantee he's going to have enough Republican votes in January to confirm him if he withdraws the nomination now. Well, unless the weaponization fund and this other provision is put to bed. There's a lot more senators than just me and Tillis concerned about that.
And Kelly, when I asked Cornyn about it this morning, he told me the president's comments that, oh, Cornyn's just doing this because he's mad at him, those are erroneous and it's a convenient excuse.
Because both men have talked about the principles behind this. They don't want taxpayer money used to compensate victims, the perceived victims or allies, and they're uncomfortable about the IRS settlement. So that certainly is part of it. Do you think this is different than the tensions with Thune?
I certainly think it is. The tensions with Thune are so notable because if you cover him every day, right, this is somebody who's so poised. You can't really tell all much that he's thinking. But in the case of the president and his jabs at him, most of those interactions we have are off camera because of where he is in the Capitol. The smile and smug laughter on his face every time has just been growing exponentially. And so when it comes with Leader Thune, Republicans are the ones who vote for him in the Senate. It's a closed ballot process, and that's basically what Thune said. He said he doesn't vote in my election, which I thought was interesting. With Cornyn and Tillis, they're not running anymore. I mean, they're free. They're free. And as Senator Tillis told me a few months ago in our interview, it's a little different when you're free, right? You get to say the things you're actually thinking and do the things that you actually want to do. And so I don't think they're going to let up that easily, but we'll see what came of this meeting with Blanche.
And Ryan, you and I cover the Justice Department, spend a lot of time dealing with things that Blanche is involved in. How do you view this, and what are you learning from talking to people that they expected this to go pretty smoothly and that he would be confirmed, if not, or at least moved to the next phase today or maybe early next week? And that seems to be very, very up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, members of that YOLO caucus, right, are the ones who are really sort of holding this up. It is really remarkable because I think, they're worried about the value of that IRS essential agreement, right? And they're also, the weaponization fund is still this major thing. And there are other ways that potentially they could go forward still reimbursing individuals, even if they set aside that weaponization fund. There's just a procedure to do that anyway. And they also have been paying out to other Trump allies. And so I think getting this in writing in some fashion is something I think that has been a priority for members of the Senate there. But there's been this major hesitation to do that on the DOJ side, to put anything further in writing. They had this hearing. He said that, they weren't moving forward with it, but they really have resisted putting it in writing. So I think that's.
And how notable is that to you in that Blanche said he was under oath, and he repeatedly said the fund is not moving forward, and yet the language that these two senators want seems to be a bridge too far. Now, we also have to explain to people, it's not just the Department of Justice, it is also the Trump family as plaintiffs, that their lawyers, separate private lawyers, are also a part of this. But is this something where Blanche is up against his own boss?
Certainly. And I think the language of that Trump post sort of lays that out, that he was willing to just sort of say, hey, he can be in this acting capacity for a longer period of time. That's not that important to me. And I think, you can sort of reading behind the leaves there, he would also have to kind of agree to this because he's the other party. And that's why, judges and for all these former judges have raised questions about the really unique situation that we find ourselves in here, where you have, the executive controlling one side and the other side of this litigation. It's just a really unusual circumstance for sure that has been playing out here.
And that's what makes it controversial. Yeah. Do you get a sense when you hear the two senators saying somewhat complimentary things about Blanche, that he's negotiating in good faith, he's having conversations, do you get a sense that he has a strategy that is different than the president's?
I mean, he still has to get that all checked off because they do seem to be very willing to vote for him as long as this is sort of signed off on. This is like the only thing holding it up. So it seems as though, based on your reporting, it seems as though they're just kind of, what's the deal here? Why don't we just sort of move forward and get this written out?
And they keep saying they don't know who is in charge.
Correct.
That is preventing it from going forward, even though you could guess who's in charge.
Yes.
They leave it open to people to maybe fill that gap with who might be in charge. We're watching this closely. If you get any updates while we're on the air, please let us know. Thank you both so much for being here.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.